You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. We got 2 more episodes. This is one of the 2 left this year, guys. Let me tell you the schedule for the remainder of 2024. This one with Monique Mathiesen is the penultimate episode of this year. Next week, I will not be dropping one on Tuesday because it's Christmas Eve. So we're going to drop it on Monday, the 23rd. It's going to be an episode explaining all parts of the Nicene Creed with your friend and mine, friend of the show, Dr. Clark Carlton. This idea keeps popping in my head when we're saying the Nicene Creed in the liturgy that I need to do an episode breaking this down because each line is very meaningful. And so who do I go to for that? Clark Carlton. He's going to be our guest on that one. And the following week, the Tuesday that these would normally drop is December 31st, New Year's Eve. Guys, your party plans do not need to be interrupted by this show. They will not be. Next Monday, the 23rd, the last show of 2024. And then we're going to skip New Year's Eve week and then resume after that. I've already got some great things lined up for 2025. So we'll get into that. The last 2 episodes certainly got some feedback, didn't they? It impacted a lot of people in a lot of various ways, and I kind of knew it was going to do that. One thing, like I mentioned at the end of the last episode with Stormy Waters, he will not leave you feeling apathetic or blah. None of what he says is milquetoast. Some of you loved it. Some of you were skeptical. Some of you just didn't like some of it. But there was a lot of good feedback. You don't have to agree with everything every guest says on my show. If you did, it wouldn't be that great of a show, right? So I hope you guys got something out of that. I know it made a lot of you think, and that's what counts. This one's going to make a lot of you think too. Monique Mathiesen, you know, there's aspects of her story that are unique, and then there's aspects that a lot of you guys as inquirers or recent converts or maybe old school converts will relate to. And we're friends on Facebook. I should be friends with her in real life. She lives like an hour away. Her and her family are just an hour up the road. She attends Father Moses McPherson's parish up in Georgetown. Fellow sister in Rocor, and her posts about her experiences from Protestantism to Orthodoxy are very intriguing, very articulate. She's very graceful in her presentation of things and what she's learned and how she feels about, let's say, the old her versus the new her and experiences she's gone through. Oftentimes, some of the people in her non-Orthodox life will push back in ways that I find interesting, and she always handles it with beauty and grace. And she's never prideful. So we're going to talk about some of the things she's learned and her experiences, why she left Protestantism, what she saw there that didn't quite gel, let's say, and the life she now has in the Orthodox Church with a beautiful family. And I think you're going to enjoy this. Monique Mathiesen, welcome to the show, ma'am. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on here.
Yes, fellow Texan. Just about an hour. I'm in Lockhart. I don't know if you knew that. And you're
I was going to ask.
Yeah, you're up near Georgetown, I guess.
Yes, we're in Georgetown. Yep.
And you go to church, as we were just talking off air, at Father Moses' parish, and he's been on this show. Yeah. You know, my listeners are fans of him.
How I found you initially was through that podcast episode, which was great.
Yes, yeah. He's trying to get to my level as far as lifting. But we'll see. I hope he hears
One
this.
Day.
Yeah. I'll let you just talk about quickly before we jump into everything, who you are, what you do, and how long you've been Orthodox, et cetera. Anything you think my audience will find pertinent.
All right. Well, I'm Monique, like you said, and I'm a mom of 3. I'm married, been married for 6 years. I became Orthodox in October on the 5th. So I had been in the church for a year prior to that as a catechumen, and we got baptized together as a family, all of us. And it's been great experience. This is the first time I've ever been in a church where I haven't wanted to like jump ship.
Really? Okay. Well, we'll talk about that because you did some ship jumping early on.
Yes, lots of church hopping.
I think there's going to be people that hear this, see this, and think how fortunate they came into Orthodoxy together. They're married. Their kids are baptized. There's a lot of dysfunction, especially with people. You're in your late 20s. Your husband's in his early 30s. Do you see that dysfunction with men and women in the quote unquote dating scene and all of this stuff right now?
I've seen a lot of men in the Orthodox Church, like young guys coming in, and there's not as many women to keep up with them. Mm-hmm. And so I can see the draw. I don't know if this is happening in other parishes. I don't think it's happening in our parish, but I can see the draw of like, we got to convert a Baptist, or we got to get someone from this other faith to like kind of join into the church, kind of flirt and convert vibe, just because there's so few women, unfortunately, coming in. Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. I joke that you have to be a little bit autistic to like find Orthodoxy in America, just because you have to like really be into like history and like searching. And I don't know. I feel like women tend to stay where their families are and their communities. So if they're raised a certain way, they don't tend to expand outside of that unless they have a good reason to like search, or they're feeling like something's off. And I don't know. Yeah. I don't think a lot of Americans even know it's an option.
Right. So, I didn't.
I didn't either for years. So it's becoming more popular, but I think the men will probably have to lead the charge, and maybe eventually, hopefully women will follow suit. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
What was your upbringing as far as church type stuff goes?
Yeah. So my parents my dad, he was initially raised Roman Catholic, and then my mom was raised secular Jewish, not really practicing anything, just pretty much agnostic, I think. And she converted first to Protestantism. I think they were Pentecostal. My dad converted with her, and then they became like non-denominational Calvinistic Baptist. So that's what I was raised with. And it was very much an anti-Catholic, like Catholics aren't Christian. Anything that looked remotely Catholic is like, wrong. They have a false gospel. So I was always told like my grandparents weren't Christian because they're Roman Catholic. And we would always like evangelize to Catholics like they were Christian. So very much an anti-Catholic bias. And I had never even heard of Orthodoxy.
Okay. That's interesting. So my listeners are probably tired of hearing this, but for you in this conversation, the sake of this, I grew up for a few years in my teenage years, I grew up going to a church in San Antonio pastored by a fellow named John Hagee, which is about the biggest Zionist, probably non-political mouthpiece. I mean, he is political, but outside of the U.S. government, he's the biggest voice for that. And I kind of liked it at the time. He yells a lot, and you would literally be a Bible thumper and hit it. And I thought, that's kind of crazy, cool. Saw tongues being spoken. Yeah. And then I moved away from San Antonio, got a career out in a different city, and became atheist libertarian for 20-something years because I guess the stuff Hagee was saying didn't sink into me or seem legitimate. So it's kind of like, that seems lame. Yeah. And then in 2020, as things went down, and by the grace of God and various guests and friends, they would drop the word Orthodox and started researching from there. So at Hagee's church, and I've heard this since, like from other people who are critiquing Orthodoxy or Catholicism, I never heard this anti-Catholic presupposition, I suppose you could call it. But now, since then, dipping my toes in various discussions online and whatnot, I have heard Protestants. Where does that come from?
I think it's just like ignorance of church history. And so when I was Protestant, we did like church history classes at our church, and it would start with Luther. And it would start with Luther basically saying, like, here's my 95 theses. Everything the Catholic Church is teaching is wrong. They have a false gospel. Now we're the true church. Like, we're the real church.
Wow. Okay.
Which is ironic because they don't agree with anything Luther teaches. Like, they're not Lutheran. We were Baptist. So it's really funny because Luther would have considered them heretics, you know?
Yes.
But they just have this idea that the church was just completely lost basically after the apostles. Maybe there were a few Baptists in there in church history we don't know about, like Trail of Tears kind of a thing. And then Luther just brought back the true gospel. And so anything Catholic, it's like, that's false gospel. They don't believe in faith alone. They don't believe in sola scriptura. So, you know, they're not even Christian by any Protestant standards. And I'm sure like more high church Protestants like Anglicans and maybe even some Lutherans and Presbyterians might think there might be some true Christians in the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, but the majority of them will just say like they're not, they're a different sect, almost like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. Yeah.
Do you think, and coming from that type of background, did those types look, let's say, upon the Jewish religion, Judaism, as more favorable than Catholicism?
That's a good question. It's interesting.
I just thinking of it now because, you know, going to Hagee's church, that was like a huge thing.
Well, they were definitely Zionists. They definitely were super pro-Israel. Yeah. And it's even funny because I'm ethnically Jewish. My mom's Jewish. And I just remember dating this seminary guy and he was so fascinated by the fact that I was Jewish. He's like, do I get a part in the like millennial kingdom with you? Like, oh my weird, goodness gracious. Like just weird fetishizing of like Jewishness. And then also being like, oh, you're one of God's chosen people. Like there's this like weird pride in like being a Messianic Jew or a Jew who converted to Christianity. So yeah, I don't know. They're very pro-Israel. They kind of see Judaism as like very parallel to Christianity. They like know that it's not, they don't have the gospel, right? They don't have Christ, but they're like, oh, you're so close, kind of a vibe.
This, again, I love talking to people that grew up in, let's say, a Protestant manner, but that's different from the one I did. But it seems to me, and tell me where I'm wrong, if I'm wrong. Let's say a lot of them don't even say I'm Protestant. And in fact, we'll get to, I saw this in comments in one of your posts, this pushback that people were giving you about Orthodoxy. And they would say, well, I'm not Protestant. I just believe the Bible, which is weird. But I think that a lot of people that go to a medium to large size, let's say non-denominational church, want to go and hear worship music, a good sermon, a TED Talk of sorts, and feel kind of good and leave and get them prepared for their week mentally, if you will. I was actually surprised to hear that you guys had like a church history education in yours. I don't think, from my limited experience in the Protestant world, that that's a big commonality within those type of places. That I don't know that maybe the large amount of the congregations understand church history, let's say deep theology, early church writings, who canonized the Bible. Is that your experience?
You know, what's really interesting is I grew up in a sect of non-denominationalism where they were extremely like theological, very academic, very much into systematic theology books and, you know, reading the Bible line by line and exegeting passages. And it was very dry, actually, compared to a lot of other Protestant denominations. Like, they weren't super seeker-friendly, the denomination I grew up in. It was very much like we preach the word and we go line by line and we, you know, go through this verse and talk about what it meant and that kind of a thing. And so I thought I was very theologically grounded. And everyone that I grew up with, you know, there was almost this pride of like, we understand the Bible, and all these other people, they don't understand it like we do. Like, we have these books and, you know, all this stuff. There wasn't a lot of church history outside of like maybe reformers. And even then it was more of a glossary of like, here's kind of the general view of what happened in the Reformation, but not really like the differences between like, here's what Presbyterians believe, here's what Lutherans believe, here's what we believe. It was more so, here's these characters like Calvin and Luther, or like, John Owens, and these characters are Puritans, and we like their writings, and they'd read the parts of their writings that agreed with what they already were teaching us. So you kind of have this understanding that all these people already agree with you. Which is kind of what led me out of Protestantism, is because I started reading them for myself, and I'm like, these people don't even agree with each other, let alone with anything that I was taught. So the church I was under was John MacArthur's church, if you're familiar with him. He's a very popular non-denominational pastor. He has seminaries, and he just pops out pastors left and right. He has his own commentary Bible. It's in Sun Valley, California.
Okay.
Yeah. So he has his own commentary Bible. He has like written 80 plus something books. He has a systematic theology book. And so he pumps out all these pastors, and they just basically echo what he teaches in his theology.
Okay. Yeah. Let's say surface level, something just right off the top, what's different in what he teaches than, let's say, what we understand now in the Orthodox Church?
Yeah, so he has dead sacraments. They believe everything's memorial. Like we don't have the body and blood of Christ. It's just we're remembering the body and blood of Christ. Or we don't have baptism for remission of sins. It's just an image of us basically converting, and we get to tell the world that we converted, essentially. But it doesn't do anything. None of the sacraments do anything. There's only the 2 sacraments. They're Calvinists, so they believe you can't choose God. God has to choose you. There's an elect amount of people that are already predestined to be saved, and you play no part of your salvation. So they're monergistic. You play no part in your salvation. If God didn't choose you, there's nothing you can do to be chosen. Like, wow. That's it. Yeah, It's very disturbing, honestly.
Yeah, it's almost blackpilling if you're not one of the chosen ones.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, it's really sad. And then if you leave their church, it's like, oh, you were never really saved, because you can't lose your salvation. That's another thing. You're not fighting to get your salvation. You're justified, one and done, if you have faith in Christ. And then your evidence of that faith is your works. So if you have works, it's because you're saved. And then if you don't have works, you were never really saved to begin with. Kind of weird theology. Okay. And what made you kind of exit that realm? Yeah, so it was a really long journey. It took me 3 years to even step foot in the Orthodox Church. I started by just exploring the Reformers. I wanted to learn church history for myself. And I was reading like John Calvin and Martin Luther and reading their works and realizing they had a lot of differences compared to what I grew up with as a Baptist. And I was like, I want to be grounded in some like historicity. Like, I don't want to just be floating in non-denominationalism. And I didn't see that anywhere in church history that I had read. And I was very fascinated by reading the Reformers and the Puritans. So I joined like a Presbyterian church. And one of my friends who I had grown up with as a little kid at that same church, he converted to Orthodoxy. And so he would like leave random comments on my Facebook post, because I would always be talking about theology and stuff online. And he would leave comments, and then he would ask to talk. And like we'd talk on the phone a little bit about like Orthodoxy. And I'd be trying to convert him, and he'd be trying to convert me. And we had this going for like 3 years where he just asked me questions, and then I'd go OCD out and research things, because I was just so unsettled by things he would say. And I couldn't defend my positions with history, because I just assumed all this time the church fathers agreed with me, because I had never read them and no one had ever read them to me. And you just kind of vaguely know about them in Protestantism, at least in the church I was in. I knew about them, but I just assumed they all agreed with me. And so he'd tell me quotes, and I'd be like, that sounds weird. And then I'd go research, and I'd try and like justify certain things I would read. Like I remember reading the Didache, and it talking about, triple immersion or fasting before your baptism and weird things like that. And now I'm like, this isn't what we did. And trying to like understand the Protestant perspective, like, why aren't we doing these things? And it was just very unsatisfying, because one, there was like almost nothing about it. Like no one was really discussing these things, because no one cared. They were just like, anything we don't like isn't authoritative. Anything we agree with is authoritative. It's kind of how it works.
Anything we don't like, I've heard this now many times. Oh, that's just a man saying that. That's tradition of men. I keep
unless
hearing
they agree with it.
Yes, of course.
God, Holy Spirit speaking.
Yes, yeah. And in fact, we won't get into it, but even in one of the pushback on some of the stuff that you had written online. I saw a person saying, well, if you disagree with me, you disagree with the Holy Spirit because he's speaking through me. And I'm like, goodness, okay.
It's bold.
Yeah, that's troubling. But what church fathers did that church you had been in discuss? You said, well, they talked about it a little bit here and there, but not to the extent that we do in Orthodoxy. So some of the church fathers were okay to talk about? Like, how did that work?
You'd hear quotes sometimes from people like Chrysostom, and it'd be like cherry picked, where it sounds like, the church fathers do talk reverently about the scriptures and talk about it being a source of authority. So they'll use those types of verses to be like, see, they believed in sola scriptura, which is ridiculous. But they'll use those things, or it'll be something vague, like the martyrdom of Polycarp, and they'll just be like, look, he was a martyr for Christ, not super controversial, doesn't really discuss anything theological that would be different from what we were in. So they mention like maybe his martyrdom, or St. Athanasius on the incarnation, like we both believe that he was incarnate, that he's God, like stuff that we have common ground on. They would maybe quote those, but it wasn't even very often that they would do that. Most of the time they would just quote each other. Primarily, especially in John MacArthur's church. He's like a legend. Like he might as well just be God himself, because, everything out of that man's mouth is just
his gospel.
Gold to all these people.
Yes. Yeah. Was there a theme of, if it's outside of the Bible, we don't need to understand it or know it or care as much?
Yeah, they would say it's not relevant. It's, just tradition. Traditions are very like evil, kind of like, these are bad things. These are what the Pharisees had. We don't need these things. So yeah, they don't see the point of it. They're like, if it doesn't save me, why do I need to know about it? I hear that all the time. Like even currently with my Baptist friends, they'll be like, with things like, for instance, head covering. I'll be like, can you see this in the Bible? Like it's very explicit in the Bible.
Right.
And they'll be like, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't save me. So I don't need to do it.
Yeah.
I don't need to worry about that.
I've seen it now said, maybe some of it was in some of the comments I had read on your stuff, that we believe in the Bible and the Bible alone. And then you point out, well, the body and blood of Christ and the Eucharist is in the Bible. Yeah. And it's like, well, not that part. It just seems weird. And
well,
not
they
the
reinterpret the Bible, so they don't rely on commentary from the church fathers. They rely on commentary from people like John MacArthur and
people that have been alive in the last 100 years, rather than the ones that knew the
or
apostles.
Themselves too. Like they'll just read something and be like, "Here's what I see in this verse, so this is what I believe." And they're so used to it. Like the default in America is to be Baptist, I think.
Yes.
So even as when I was Presbyterian, you'd be trying to explain this from the reformers, and they're like, I don't see it. Because they're just so like brainwashed into the Baptist presuppositions. So they read it into their Bible, even though it's not there. They are basically indoctrinated and trained to see it. So no matter how many times you try and show them, like, here's what it means, they're like, no, it means what I've been taught my entire life and what everyone else. Like when you tell someone you're baptized in America, they're not going to assume it's as a baby. They're not going to assume it's for remission of sins. They're just going to default to the Baptist position because that's the most popular here.
Once a month, my supporters of this show and myself and a special guest have a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded. It's not posted. It's just private. It's between you guys, the guest, and myself. I do this because it means a lot for you guys who support me by showing me that this show means a lot to you. I love talking with you. I look at it as like a benefit for people that support the show, but it's really a benefit for me. I get to know you guys and have an off-the-record discussion with our guest. And, sometimes topics you don't want to necessarily have all the ins and outs discussed online, if you know what I mean. So to be in this group, please go to patreon.com/counterflow and donate $5 or more per month. And it gets you in this club. We do it once a month. It's a great time. It's great people. They're all smarter than me. So that's an upgrade from what you're used to. I can tell you that. The guests are always guests that people want to hear from. A lot of you guys will be familiar with many of the guests. Father Turbo's done it. Father Deacon Ananias has done it. David Patrick Carey's done it. My own priest, Father Ignatius, has done it. Father Moses McPherson's done it. It's a very good time, and I think you guys would enjoy it. If you love this content, please go to patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Thank you. Yeah, and I've noticed too on some pushbacks I've received and I've seen you receive, they're looking at Orthodoxy through their own sort of Baptist lens. And it's almost, I've heard from people, well, you think you're the one true church. It's ironic, some of that language, like, I don't think that. I'm just, that's the truth that I'm explaining to you. Right, yeah. And well, then, so do you think I'm going to hell? And it's like, I don't know. We don't have that language per se in Orthodoxy. Like, I don't look around and go, oh, he's going to hell, and he's not. But they do have that language. Mm-hmm. And so it's weird. It feels like they think we're reflecting that back onto them all of a sudden. And then it's kind of this weird prideful energy. Well, why do you think I'm, it's like, I don't think you are. I didn't say that.
Yeah. I've experienced that a lot too.
Yeah. It's I want to, here's another thing that I know now that you've discovered the beauty of since coming to Orthodoxy, and I think you might get some pushback from those outside of the church. But talk about your recent experience with the Hawaiian Ivoron icon and what that was like and how you view it now versus how you would have thought of something like that, let's say 10 years ago.
Yeah, so the Hawaiian icon was amazing, like such a cool experience. As soon as I entered the church, it was just like it smells like rose water to me. Just smelled like roses, and it was so strong. And then I just remember as soon as the liturgy started, it just went even stronger somehow. It was so weird. Like right on the dot, as soon as the deacon said the prayer, it was just amazing. But yeah, as a Protestant, I would have totally looked at that icon and just think it was either demonic, like Lord have mercy. But yeah, that probably would have been something I would have thought as a Protestant, or that they were like rigging it or it was fake. And especially when you look in like Pentecostal churches, there is a lot of like weird magician type stuff that goes on because they're trying to, pretend it's the Holy Spirit. And so they will do weird stuff. And so I understand the skepticism coming from a Protestant background, why someone would think that. But it's also, I was just thinking about it, and I kind of posted about this on Facebook, of how I was essentially like a functional atheist as a Protestant, just because.
Explain that, yeah.
Yeah, like I believed in demonic warfare, right? Like I believed that demons could possess people. I believed that like whenever you would see, weird supernatural things occurring in the world, or the Illuminati or Masonry and weird stuff like that, I totally believed like Satan was involved in those things and they were supernatural things. But then when it came to God, as a cessationist, someone who believes like the signs of the apostles stopped after their death, we didn't believe in any miracles or anything.
Really? Okay, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, so we basically believe the signs of the apostles, the miracles, ceased when they died. And that they only existed to establish the church. That's what people like John MacArthur teach. And most of the reformers also taught that. And so, yeah, there's this kind of sense of like, there's nothing now. We're just waiting for Christ to return.
So the works of God, the power,
miracles.
Yeah, he just can't do it now.
I mean, they might say like, oh, he could do it like if he heals a little kid, but it's not going to be in a very tangent way. Like you might pray and then someone eventually gets better, but it's not like a miracle where it's obvious kind of a thing. And there are Protestants who aren't like that, but they're usually Pentecostal or of some kind. But all of the like Reformed traditions, they definitely take that position, and they don't believe in any kind of miraculous stuff occurring or people being able to do miracles, especially like it would only be God. You would never be able to do like a miracle. So very different.
So then that would lead me to ask, what would their view of the saints be? I suppose that there's no such thing outside of the apostles, possibly.
Yeah, they haven't read them. That's really what it comes down to. Like, it's interesting. I've had some friends inquiring. I'm like, read St. Athanasius on the life of St. Anthony. And like, it's just, you see it all over the saints, these people doing crazy things. And we just never read them. So we don't have anything to like look at. They would just read the parts that agree with them. But yeah, there's nothing in terms of the miraculous in the saints. We don't read St. Paisios or any of the modern saints either. So yeah, there's none of that.
What I want to go back to that Hawaiian Iveron icon really quick. Can you explain to people who are like, what are they talking about? What it is briefly, and again, like what that was like, seeing it, smelling it, etc. Because that's going to sound, if someone just stumbles upon this show and they're like, what are they talking about? It might sound kind of crazy to some people.
Yeah. So the icon just streams myrrh. It just like seeps out of the pores of the icon. And they have it in this like glass casing with like cotton balls and cotton just like at the bottom of it, because it just pours out of this icon. And people will collect the oil and use it for like healing, or they'll pray to the icon for miracles. It's helped with like infertility, blindness, cancers, different things. But yeah, I think it's been streaming since like 2007, streaming myrrh. So yeah, it's pretty crazy to see, like, just it's so strong and it smells for so long. Like my friend had seen it last year and she gave me a little bag of oil for my kid because he had like a bite or something on his eye and it looked really swollen. She's like, just put this on him. And it was from like a year ago and had been reused multiple times, and it's still so pungent on this like cotton ball. It's crazy.
Yeah, I guess the skeptics would say, well, someone's putting it in there, or I don't know, pumping it. I don't know what you would say, but somehow it's fake, I guess. Something you wrote that I found, it got you a lot of attention, and I thought it was intriguing. No Protestant has ever been able to answer me when I ask how you can schism from an invisible church. The smartest pastors and scholars alike begin fumbling around when you ask this question. People may be wondering, watching this, what is it? What do you mean invisible church? What's that versus visible church and the schism thing? Can you talk about this?
Yeah, so the early church talks about in the creed, we have the one holy Catholic and apostolic church, right? And the early reformers actually still quoted the creed, a lot of them. But the non-denominational Baptists and evangelicals, they don't say the creed anymore. So a lot of them don't even know that this was a saying of the early church. And this was like the standard of Christianity was the creed. You have to believe in the creed. And so they believe in what's called the branch theory or the invisible church theory, where basically anybody who has faith is a Christian. And so you could be Catholic, you could be Orthodox, you could be Protestant, you could be Baptist, Lutheran, Presbyterian. It doesn't matter. Some guy out in on an island with nothing, but if you have faith in Jesus, you're part of the invisible church. So they don't believe in a canonical church with boundaries or authority. It's just kind of whoever has, faith in Christ is part of the invisible church. And I struggled with that as a Presbyterian because we baptize babies as Presbyterians. And I'm like, okay, so we're baptizing them into what? The covenant. And it's like, but what is the covenant? What does that consist of? And they would say the visible church, meaning like they're being brought into the church, but it's like, but you don't really believe in a visible church because they don't believe that those babies are saved, which is why they don't commune them, because they have to later on have a confession and then they can commune. So I'm like, but then why are we baptizing them? So that's kind of what got me starting to think and question Protestantism, was actually not communing children.
Wow. Okay. See, I'm learning stuff from this too. So, so there's some sort of disconnect between the Presbyterian church you were in and then some other denominations of Protestantism, where it's like, no, I assume I could just start the Church of Buck Johnson at this house and have a few of my neighbors over. And
it's actually so common. I have friends who start house churches and it's just like nothing. Like no one thinks anything of it. There's no apostolic succession. They don't believe in apostolic succession. So it's just, if I wanted to start a church, I could start a church. Like there's no boundaries. And there's, like I said, it's not canonical. There's no sense of authority. It's just whoever has some understanding of the Bible that other people agree with, and they can get enough people under them, they can start a church and have valid sacraments, because in America, the sacraments aren't really sacraments. They don't mean anything anyway.
Yeah. What would the sacrament be?
Baptism and communion. But you could do that with like Ritz crackers and grape juice and baptize in your bathtub. Like I remember as a Presbyterian, I was trying to find a church near my parents' house because we were living with my parents at the time. And they were like, just baptize them in the tub. and come to our Baptist church.
Oh,
like they
you do it yourself?
legitimately, yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, wow. I mean, if that's all it takes, you could have just said, well, I've already done that. I've given them baths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I remember the last Protestant church I ever went to was a Lutheran church. And it was like the end of my road. Like I was like, if this isn't it, then it's not here, because Lutheranism was like the start. So I'm like, this is as far back as I can go. And I just remember the pastor saying to people online who were watching, he's like, go get your crackers and your wine.
Oh,
and we're going to take communion. Like for those of you who are at home, because this was post-COVID. So people were still sometimes at home. A lot of people were back in church, but it was 2021. And he was like, yeah, if you're at home still, because you're, not wanting to come in because of the pandemic or whatever, just take it at home. And that's when I was like, this is something crazy. Like I can't do this anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would be, to any thinking person, critical thinker, that would almost be an atheist factory.
Yeah.
Because if you just start thinking a few layers below how silly this is, then this isn't real. And it's not real.
Yeah. That's what I realized during 2020 is all these churches closed. And I'm like, you're telling the world you're non-essential.
Yes.
Like
correct.
That's literally what you're telling the world, that you don't need to be here. You can just listen to some sermon online. So many of my friends never returned to church. They're like, why? I can watch online now. Everyone's live streaming.
Yes.
And they're not wrong. I mean, that's all Protestantism has to offer. They don't have sacraments. So all they have to offer is live stream guy talking about something he read in the Bible.
Yes. Yeah.
That you can agree or disagree on. It doesn't even matter.
The fact that I'm not trying to, so if I come off as sounding prideful, I apologize, but my church did not close during the pandemic. And the fact that some churches did and remained closed for quite some time and have just reopened and kind of swept that under the rug without like public repentance or apologies, and the people in their congregations that just went with it quietly.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy. It still bugs me that was a thing.
Yeah, it really shook me. I mean, I was so adamant. I was Protestant at the time, but I was so adamant that we should be open, and I was, out rallying every week. And I remember posting on Facebook like Hebrews 10, that do not forsake the assembly. And I remember my pastor at the time actually like called me, and he was like, this verse is not in context. Like this is about the heart attitude. It's not about actually physically going to church. And I'm like, but if you have the heart to go to church, why wouldn't you physically go to church? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Just trying to justify it because they were also terrified of COVID.
Crazy. And, also, and it's like, if you have faith in Christ and all it took to shake you was a light version of the flu. And I've had, without me trying to get a strike on this show, I've had the flu many times and I've had the other thing many times. I'll take the other thing for the most part. But like, if that's what shook you, and I know Orthodox people that got the medical intervention, oh, well, I just got to do it under this one circumstance. And it's like, dude, this was the clamp down like at a very minor level. And we read lives of the saints who were like hung upside down on crosses. It's like, man, we are far from that. And I am too, but my goodness, if that's all it took to shake you, you might be in for a bumpy road. It's honestly scary
to think about future persecution because of how many churches and people just so quickly folded out of fear. And like you said, the lives of the saints, I mean, they were brutally tortured, like multiple times over. And for things like iconography, like they would be brutally tortured over icons, like not even like the gospel itself, just things related to the church. I mean, arguably icons are related to the gospel too, but you get my point. It wasn't even just like deny Christ. It was like, you can't have an icon. And they would be brutally tortured over that. And over here, we're just like, we don't need the sacraments. We don't need anything. We'll just sit at our house and watch the pastor talk.
Yeah. Wild.
It just goes to show you what they actually believe about the church.
Yeah. Well, that's disturbing to say the least. Did the events, and just to harp back real quick on that, being tortured over icons, a lot of that came through a spirit of Islam and Islamic tendencies over in that area of the world when they didn't want icons anywhere. So for those non-Orthodox listening that have problems with icons also, just understand where that kind of spirit comes from. Let me ask, did the events of 2020 shake you towards Orthodoxy, or is it just that happened to be a part of what was going on?
It definitely, I felt like radicalized me in a lot of ways. Just because it just felt like everyone was gaslighting me. Like the whole world was like gaslighting people who wanted the truth.
Yes.
And so I just saw all these truthers, as we're calling them now, or conspiracy theorists. And we're all just like, this is plain as day. Why is everyone pretending this isn't happening?
Yes.
And
the emperor has no clothes sort of thing. And it's like, guys, we all see this, right? No, this is totally something else.
Yeah, it was mind warfare at the highest level. And so I just kind of felt like I just needed to find the truth in every area of my life. It just set me on this journey towards finding truth in general and not just believing whatever I was taught. So in so many areas, Christianity included, but it just opened my mind that I could be very wrong about things.
It seems like you already had that.
I was a lot more stubborn theologically. I thought I had found the truth in like my non-denom church because of how academic they were.
Okay.
And, just kind of seeing people turn their back on me for saying things that were true, it made me more open to people who weren't necessarily in my bubble. And so by being exposed to people who weren't in my bubble, it introduced me to different traditions of the church and made me more open-minded.
Okay. When did you finally take the dive into walking into an Orthodox liturgy, and what was your thought process of why that was a thing to do?
Yeah, I remember. So we had been briefly in Dallas. We were part of a Reformed Presbyterian church in Dallas, and they were very much true to Calvinism. Like straight out of Geneva, this church was very strict on the regulative principle. Like this was very authentically Presbyterian. And I was trying to find a similar church in California, and I could not find it. I was like, there's so few of these churches like that are actually authentically what the Westminster Confession teaches, that hold to these standards. All these Presbyterian churches claim to hold to the Westminster Confession of Faith, but none of them really did in practice. And so that was really shaking to me. And I'm like, this doesn't really exist. There's like 7 churches in all of America that holds to the actual Westminster Confession. And we're all, in my mind at the time, I'm like, that means that these people are in serious sin because they're going against the confessions.
Okay.
But we're all just pretending like we're all friends, like, oh, we're all Christians. It's fine if you don't, if you have instruments in your worship and if you're not holding to the regulative principle the way we do, like we're all brothers and sisters in Christ kind of an attitude is what they had. But it was just so weird because I'm like, this isn't what the Puritans were. And so I was just looking for anything that was like authentically traditional in the Protestant sense. And I tried so many different Presbyterian churches. I was getting so discouraged. Sorry, did my thing freeze?
No, you're all good.
Okay. So it was just really bizarre. I tried going to different like Lutheran churches. I was looking at Anglicanism, just trying to find anything that was like rooted in history that was traditional and actually held to the standards that they claimed to hold to. And I just was so discouraged. I couldn't find it. And I just remember my friend telling me like, you're not finding it because, it's not the true faith.
It's not there
and,
where you're looking.
Just kind of talking to me about ecclesiology and the concept of schism, which is what that post was about. And, he was showing me quotes from the saints talking about schism. And one of them was like, even the blood of martyrdom couldn't remove the stain of schism from the church. And so he was showing me basically that all of the saints believed in a visible like church. Like you could actually leave the church. It wasn't just a concept or a theory. It's like there is an actual church and it has authority. And I think it just clicked for me in that moment. Like, okay, why am I giving Luther so much weight? Like, why does his opinion hold so much weight about what the gospel is? Because my whole life I was like, if you don't believe in faith alone, you're not a Christian. And I'm like, why do I believe that? Why do I believe this man who, when I was reading him, sounded like a straight psychopath? Like he speaks horribly about the poor. he talks about wanting them dead. He talks horribly about like Jews burning their houses down, like just crazy stuff that like would not fly. If anyone knew him in real life, they would not be like, oh, a totally wonderful Christian man by Protestant standards at all. And I'm just like, this is the guy that I'm like basically just submitting to, and like intellectually, like if I leave his version of the gospel, that I'm not a Christian. It just sounded crazy to me when I actually I've thought about it for long enough. And so my friend was like, you should go visit Father Josiah Trenum's church. It's only 45 minutes from you guys.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, all right, I got nothing else to lose. I can't even find a church in the area that I agree with, like on anything. And that practices the way that, you know, I think is the Protestant, you know, right way to do it. And so I was like, what do I have to lose? I'll just go visit this church.
Oh, man.
And yeah, as you can imagine, it's a good first time experience with Orthodoxy. I had no idea what was going on, but it was beautiful, whatever it was.
Yeah, you must have thought, I've never been to one that looks like this before.
Oh yeah, it felt very Muslim, honestly. And I know like Muslims
really?
are LARPing Christianity, but from my like ignorant American perspective, I was like, what in the world is going on? It was like very like Byzantine style chants and very Arabic feeling. And
he's Antiochian, it's Antiochian, correct?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay, that makes sense. Wow, okay. Did you find the beauty of the way everything looked inside to be appealing relative to what you were used to?
Oh, it was gorgeous. And I was used to a commercial building box with like gray walls and no beauty at all. Okay. And I always hated that. Like, yeah, I would. Why can't the church be beautiful? It's God's house. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And of course, people are drawn to beauty. Like, God made us that way. If God's the creator of beauty, like, why wouldn't we have beauty all around us, especially in the church? And so, yeah, it's like one of the most, still to this day, I've been to a few Orthodox cathedrals that are like very elaborate. And I still think his church is my favorite in terms of aesthetics, just gorgeous iconography, like massive icons. And it's a beautiful church.
Did y'all meet with him?
We met him briefly, yeah. Okay. And he has a similar background. He was Presbyterian also. So he was talking a little bit about ecclesiology. And his book, Rock and Sand, was the first book that I had read. I actually had to read it twice because the first time I read it, I was like, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. I don't think I was ready for it.
Okay.
I was like, this can't be true.
Yes, right.
And then I read more about Luther and I was like, oh, dang, it is true.
And then how did it progress from there?
It was immediate. Like my husband's like, I feel like the Holy Spirit's here. And he always had issues with like Calvinism and stuff. He wasn't raised the same as I was. He was more, he kind of went off on his own, doing his own thing. And then he came back into like the non-denom church as an adult. And so it was like a year before we met, actually. So he didn't have really a lot of theology to undo. It was just kind of like, oh, I believe in Jesus and I'm going to try and, not do bad things, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
So he didn't have to unlearn a lot of stuff like I did. And he just was like, this is how we're supposed to worship as soon as he left the church. And we were like addicted to going to liturgies for like that whole month. We were like, every day we were like, let's try this church. Let's go to this church. We were just going to different liturgies, trying to like experience, I don't know, the grace was just so strong in that first month of us going. We just couldn't stop.
And I assume then were you a catechumen in Texas or did you do it out there first?
We became catechumen in Texas under Father Moses, yeah.
Okay. Were you hit with, let's say, demonic attacks from, let's say, maybe the second you stepped into Father Josiah's church to the minute you were baptized with Father Moses? Did you experience some of that stuff that we do sometime?
I experienced like extreme anxiety and like insomnia. When I first was like, I'm going to do this, like, this is real, like, let's become catechumens. We're going to these churches. And Father Moses actually sent me a book. He sent me my elder, Joseph the Hezekiah. And he talks about, being attacked by demons and all these things. And I was like freaking out because, we didn't believe like, Christians could really be attacked by demons. Just those other people who were, doing witchcraft and that kind of stuff. Like they would attack them, but they'd leave us alone. And so for the first time in my life, I was hit with this spiritual reality. Like, oh, this is real. And so is the other side of these things that could come for you. And I just like could not sleep for months. I was like so tweaked out. And now in hindsight, I'm like, this was totally just Satan trying to keep me out of the church. But
correct.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that.
I have found once you start heading towards something true and good and beautiful, some of those little attacks. And for those listening, and I know friends of the show, Father Peter Hears and his brother John Hears interviewed Tucker, and Tucker's talking about like the physical marks he had on him. I'm not even referring to something that extreme. I just mean oftentimes you hear, oh, demonic attack, and you might think of like something grabbing you or something. It's all up in your heart and your mind. And so like it's the intrusive voices and things like that are saying. And I think it was my spiritual father, Father Turbo, said, if you hear it and it says you should do this or you shouldn't do that, it's demonic. When it's I should do this, I shouldn't do that, it's Christ. But that's sort of what we're talking about here. Just for those
totally experienced that with the Jesus prayer too. Like I felt like if you start doing this, then you're going to start getting attacked. You might start seeing things or bad things might start happening to you. So I was like scared to say the Jesus prayer.
Oh my goodness.
Totally demonic, obviously. But yeah.
And it's quite the opposite.
I think I read Way of the Pilgrim and I was just like, oh my gosh, what if something comes for me now? What
concerns do you get from, let's say, I assume you have friends, whether it be online or in real life, IRL, as the kids say, that have questions about the church, and is there a common concern or pushback that you get, even if they're a little bit interested?
It's almost always three things. It's the faith alone thing, so justification by faith alone. Second would be iconoclasm. So they're very anti-icons, or they're like, why are you worshiping icons by kissing them or bowing to them? And then the third thing would be Marianology. Those are the three biggest stumbling blocks.
Explain what that last thing is.
So anything about Mary, basically, that they believe we hold her too high regard, that we pray to the saints, that we pray to her specifically. They're very weirded out by that. They don't understand it. Like, why don't you just go to God? And why do you hold Mary at this high level compared to anyone else? Like, she was just a regular person like me or like these other people. Like, why do you hold her in such regard? So that really weirds them out. Or if you say she's sinless, they really freak out. Like, everyone sinned and fallen short. They'll start quoting like Romans kind of a thing. So
what is the problem with faith alone? Where have you come spiritually and in your journey here? What have you learned about that? That
faith can never be alone. If you really have faith, then it's always going to be with works. Like, they go together. Like, I can't say I love my husband and then, just never talk to him, never do anything, not work on our marriage at all.
Analogy I've used. I've the exact same thing. Yes.
Yeah. So I think, and it makes sense. I think the Orthodox version of salvation and our view of salvation is just, it makes so much more sense than the Calvinistic view I grew up with, where it's like you're saved or you're not saved. And then whenever you mess up big, like say you fornicate or something, it's like, we baptize them. They weren't really saved. And they kind of use baptism almost like confession, weirdly. It's like, if you commit one of these mortal sins, it's because you weren't really a Christian, so you need to get baptized, as opposed to seeing the Christian life as us constantly falling and getting back up again. It's very much like this external piety of you. If you're really a Christian, then you're going to have these works because of your faith. Like, that faith is the evidence, the works are the evidence of the faith, as opposed to the faith and works being together. And us striving towards our salvation as an end goal instead of something that's like past.
Okay. And it's like I assume they sort of think like, well, once you're saved, that's it. But that always questions, I guess the answer would be, so you can just go start murdering people. They would say, well, then you weren't technically saved, is the issue.
Yeah, exactly.
That's such an interesting.
That's actually what I've been told as I've
loophole.
become Orthodox. I'm not a Christian anymore, according to a lot of my
really
Protestant family. And so they'll say, well, you were never really a Christian. So
you're not
like,
one now?
Yeah, they would say, I'm not one now. I was never really a Christian because if I had been, I would have stayed in their church. I would have stayed true to Protestantism. And because I'm Orthodox now, I was never really Christian. I never really understood the gospel. I never really understood Calvinism. It's a lot of true Scotsman fallacies.
Yeah. Then they would have to assume or say then that no Christian was Christian up until the 1500s.
I mean, yeah, they would say that they're somewhere in church history. They don't know where. Like I've asked people, like, can you show me someone in church history who believes all the tenets of your faith? And they're like, I can't show you that, but I don't need that anyways. I have the Bible, or like, I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know who it is. And you see the same arguments from Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. Like no one holds to all of the tenets of any of those traditions because they're modern. So,
wow.
You might find certain heretical groups that like Arians, but even an Arian didn't hold to what Jehovah's Witnesses hold to.
Right.
Right.
Talk about, I can't let you go without talking about your excitement seemingly for RFK and how that aspect of your life is coming into like wide acceptance, it seems like to me.
Yeah, I love RFK. I actually used to work for the show called The High Wire, and
you did?
Bigtree. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. If you're familiar with Del Bigtree,
absolutely,
he's the host of that show, and he's a huge advocate for informed consent, and you know, making sure we have medical choices and are aware of what the government is doing to us, which is very much just warfare on us at every angle. And I'm super excited about RFK. They worked a lot with Bobby Kennedy worked a lot with Del. And I just see how much he's for the people. He's been for the people for so long. He's like the only high-ranking politician who's really listened to moms of, vaccine-injured children and really taken their concerns and, done debates and stuff. So I'm just very excited to see what he does because I know he actually cares and he's one of us in a lot of ways.
I think what he's going to do, assuming what he's going to do and what J.D. Vance's anti-interventionist foreign policy stuff could be the two biggest massive paradigm shifts of our lifetime. If J.D. Vance holds true to pulling troops out and not starting the stuff that's been happening since I've been a teenager or younger, and RFK switches around the stuff that I almost can't even imagine how different it's going to be. But those, I think, would be the two biggest paradigm shifts I can see coming.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It almost feels like it's too good to be true. Like I'm waiting for something to happen. Like, what are they going to do to make sure that we're eating corn syrup in our cereal?
I know. I can't wait to see like progressive friends of mine start simping out for like Kellogg's and
I know,
stuff
it's
the way they did for the other medical interventions in 2020. And it's like, now they love these big corporations. It's interesting.
I know. It's so weird. Like you'd think this would be so nonpartisan. Like, can we just have healthy food? Like it just blows my mind that people would be so hostile to this administration that they're willing to eat, corn syrup and red dye for the rest of their life. It's so weird.
It's gone from virtue signaling to vice signaling. Like, I'll be fat and eat food coloring and everything just because Trump's a fascist.
Being fat is actually good for you, didn't you know?
Yes. In closing, I would like you to give any sort of words to those listening who are curious about orthodoxy. I get a ton of inquirers that listen to this show. And sometimes they'll say, what's a good episode to hear that would help me shed some concerns or stuff like that. It's the beauty that you found in it, anything.
Man, I would just say like, ask questions, like hard questions. If you're a Protestant, like ask your pastor really hard questions and look for the answers in orthodoxy. Because all of the questions I couldn't answer as a Protestant, I could as an Orthodox Christian. Like, how do you schism from an invisible church? Ask your pastor. See what they have to say. Because so far, no one's been able to answer that one. Just be open-minded to the fact that you could be wrong and that it might take time to unwire your incorrect theology. Like when I went into Orthodoxy initially, I did struggle a lot with iconoclasm and the Marian doctrines. Like they were a stumbling block for me. And I had to just submit myself to the church and be like, listen, I've been wrong on so many things. I've changed my mind on so many things. Why do I think I'm an authority in the first place? Like I'm not. Like why? There's nothing special about me. So if the early church was like, if I'm reading the church fathers and I'm thinking they're wrong, then I'm the problem, not the early church fathers.
It takes us a level of humility.
It does. Yeah. I mean, I had so much spiritual pride before I, even went down the Orthodox road or anything. And just realizing like, there are so many great men and women who went before you. Just read them, read the lives of the saints. Even if you don't want to become Orthodox, just read them and see what they're about. Because, I don't know how you can read someone like St. Paisios or St. Porphyrios and walk away the same.
Well said. And speaking of that, we'll let you go in just a second. You kind of just alluded to some book recommendations, another thing people are always asking about.
Ooh, I have so many. I love to read.
Oh, like in fact, I saw your list this morning. I can because you're smart and I understand your deep level of curiosity. Your number one favorite book, that's a big one, a big chunk to bite off.
Yes, that book blew my mind. And I actually went into it so intimidated because it's like, 800 something pages. Yes. It's a big book. It's and for those of you who are aware, we're talking about The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And he was an Orthodox writer. His books are incredible. They have such strong Orthodox overtones and themes in them. And that book blew my mind. And I know a lot of people actually at my parish who became Orthodox because they started reading that book. And they were like, what is this? What kind of Christianity is this? It's so good. But yeah, I definitely recommend that one if you're into fiction. And then for other books, I think Wounded by Love is a really good one by St. Porphyrios for Lives of the Saints. And then also, if you're looking into just kind of curious about Orthodoxy or you're inquiring, I'd highly recommend Orthodoxy and Heterodoxy by Father Andrew Stephen Damick. That one was incredible. It's just a really good overview of history. I think it covers pretty much every denomination and religion out there and compares it to Orthodoxy. And so I think that's really helpful for people who are just totally brand new to all of it. Understanding where all of these different traditions came from. Yeah.
Excellent. Monique Mathiesen, thank you for being here on Counterflow.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Good. All right. Great episode. Great chat, Monique. Thank you so much for being here. Again, guys, next week, it is not dropping on Tuesday. That's Christmas Eve. Be with your families and whatnot. And again, yes, I understand it's American Christmas Eve. Sometimes you want to call it secular Christmas, whatever. My priest has already given a homily on just celebrate and have fun. Our Orthodox celebration of Christmas is still, a few weeks away. That's a totally different thing. It's not gift giving and stockings and Santa Claus, but enjoy that stuff. It's fun. Be with your families. And so again, next Monday, the 23rd, my episode with Clark Carlton explaining the Nicene Creed line by line will drop. And that is the last episode of this year. We will resume in January 2025. Thank you guys for all of the support you have given me, all of the feedback I get, negative, positive. It's usually not indifferent, so I'll say that. That's a good thing. I appreciate all of you, and we will see you next Monday, the 23rd, with Dr. Clark Carlton. You guys have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.